Welcome back here to Goldberg. Today we're going to be talking about the book Worthless by Aaron Clarey. My thoughts and whether you should check it out. Generally speaking, I would say yes. It's about a decade old now, but if you're in high school, early stages of college, you're going to definitely extract some value. If nothing else, it will provide a gut punch of sorts that you will probably not receive elsewhere. That being said, I wanted to talk about some of the subject matter and whether I agree or disagree. So we'll try to go through this. Hopefully it doesn't run too long, but it is an important topic beyond simply, should you go to school or not? So one of his first arguments is avoid the for-profit schools. You need one that's actually accredited. I should note that some of the for-profits actually are nationally or regionally accredited. I still wouldn't recommend them, but I'm also not moralistic in trying to indict the fact that they exist because the government created that market with the loans, with the grants. It's like a contractor for the feds or for the state. They're just taking advantage of what's available. And you could say, oh, but the nonprofit schools, they really care about students. I don't buy that for a second. I went to a university that was public, had a multi-billion-dollar endowment, and yet I was still paying over $20,000 a year in tuition and fees. So if they really were focused on the students, they wouldn't be building these extravagant new lecture halls and offices for the professors just to please donors who want to go down in history. So that's just my viewpoint. Still, I wouldn't say go for a for-profit, but hell, if you can make money off the stocks, I don't know if they're still listed, Apollo Education Group. I say, why not, honestly? I mean, there are worse markets out there. Let's just be perfectly real. Now, a really important point, because a lot of this book revolves around you shouldn't go to these, pursue these majors that you could just learn in the library. You should go for these STEM or engineering, medicine, the career fields that are really going to pay you money so you don't jack up a bunch of debt. And obviously you can't just easily discharge student loan debt. So that's all good advice. However, I think we need to be a little bit more critical of the entire approach in the sense that in a lot of conservative and libertarian circles, they will uplift STEM. Yeah, these are the real people that work hard and aren't lazy. And there's no doubt that to do advanced science and mathematics takes a little bit more effort for the average person than perhaps to study art, although that could be subjective depending on who we're talking to. My point is that most of these jobs do not require the amount of education and training that is essentially a legal demand of anyone wanting to enter into the field. So when I was using Teledoc last year, dude comes on camera. Oh, hey, what's up? Okay, I see what you had here, your symptoms. Okay, here, I'm going to write your prescription. Let us know. It was like 5 minutes. Okay, and that's what, even in brick and mortar, you go to a doctor's office, that's most of what they're doing. They wear the white coat because the normies think that actually means anything, and then they write you a prescription. They bop you with a hammer. They used to actually have that big diagnosis book that they'd go in the back office to flip through. Now it's just a computer database, and they match up your symptoms with something. This is not the type of a job task that requires 8 years in school, residency, all this garbage. You could do that with probably 1 or 2 years of on-the-job training easily. Same thing with being a pharmacist. If you're a pharmacist technician, do you really need to go to all that school? Many would argue no. Engineering. Yeah, a little bit more of a demand there, but still, you could find someone in high school that's good at math, good at drafting, and apprentice them to a civil engineer for 4 or 5 years. He's going to be eminently more qualified than the person coming out of a college with the 4-year degree in civil engineering because, let's be real, he's got practical first-hand experience. And you're seeing that a lot of companies are getting around these requirements by importing foreigners because in other nations, the educational standards may not necessarily be as stringent, a little bit more flexibility, it depends. But my point is, in the realm of conservatives and libertarians praising these fields, you have to realize the main reason they tend to pay more is because of all the government regulation and industrial regulation. The fact that you have to get these certain degrees. Medicine, for instance, in the 1800s in the United States was almost completely unregulated. it was dominated by women. Yeah, that's something you wouldn't actually expect. They were the ones that ran whatever medical schools existed. And then you had the formation of the American Medical Association and later the Flexner Report in 1910, which destroyed a lot of the traditional medical schools and even the schools that were run by black people and replaced it, well, this is how it has to be. All those requirements, being board certified, or in law school, you need a Juris Doctorate. You can't just apprentice yourself anymore. Passing the bar exam, the MCAT, all this stuff limits the number of people who can enter into the profession and therefore protects the cartel and allows them to fix a lot of the prices. Otherwise, you'd have a bunch of doctors, you'd have a bunch of lawyers, and even a lot more engineers practicing, and you probably wouldn't make as much money in these career fields. So it's funny how, as much as conservatives and libertarians will uplift STEM, the main reason why STEM is more lucrative on average is because of this sort of guild socialism and government regulation. I just think we have to understand that before we go forward. So a lot of the rest of the message, he says, don't do degrees that have like studies after them, East Asia, Middle Eastern studies. That really depends on the university, and it becomes that trade-off. Do you need a degree to work in the field? Not necessarily. There are ways around it, but oftentimes the degree is sort of a first step in the door. It allows you to qualify for student internships or student research programs. Again, like I was saying, it's a form of guild socialism. Otherwise, someone off the street would say, look, I've read, 50 books on East Asia. I'm eminently qualified. I can write competently. You should hire me at your think tank. So it always becomes a question of practical experience versus can you actually follow what a professor says for 4 years, okay? He says linguistics. I think linguistics is important, and a lot of these fields, to be honest with you, they do serve a purpose. And if you don't have at least a master's, it's very hard to go into, if that's your drive, it's going to be hard to work in linguistics if you don't have a master's. Sure, you could set up your own shop on the internet, but as far as, okay, you're going to be in a university position or whatnot, that's the problem. Again, there are controls put upon it. And certainly with academia in general, the reason why it's so left-wing is that when the guys who had entered universities after World War II, as they started retiring, they were replaced by a lot of leftists, and not many conservatives were going in. So in a sense, part of it's because of the cost, otherwise because, a lot of conservatives may not have had a positive viewpoint of the humanities, at least in the last several decades. So these universities have become almost unquestionably left-wing, more so than they used to be, because conservatives aren't even going to these fields, as I've talked about before. So there is a broader social cost, which you may not feel, you have any responsibility for, and I understand that, but that cost has to be acknowledged. If people saying, oh, this is not worth it, I'm not even going to try to get engaged, Get into business degrees, don't do entrepreneurship, don't do general business, only focus on accounting, finance isn't very good, marketing isn't very good. That's all going to depend on the school. You go to a top-ranked business school for your undergraduate, there are going to be opportunities. But if you go to a lower-ranked one, not so much. And yeah, obviously entrepreneurship is an oxymoron to major in it, or general business doesn't give you much in the way of useful educational background. And then when he's talking about political science, he says something to the tune of, well, who are you to think that you graduate at 22 and you should be in Congress? You should have run a business for 30 years or been in the military for 30 years. And the problem with that is that a lot of people who are pro-business politicians, even if they were entrepreneurs, they were venture capitalists, when they say run government like a business, it turns into run government to benefit business, even if that's not necessarily good for the public welfare. So the stuff they put in the 2005 energy bill with the oil and gas industry, the exemptions from the Clean and Air Water Acts, that has not been good for a lot of people and their water supply. It's not been good for public health. It's good for the corporation, but it's not necessarily good for you. Just like you can slash corporate taxes and then increase government spending for contractors, and that's good for the business, for the private sector or the semi-private sector for contracting. but it's not necessarily in the good interest of the country at large, inflation, financial stability. So there is a trade-off. Also, people that I've met who are career military vary widely. Some of them are actually, competent. A lot of them just seemed as though they stayed in there because they wouldn't have made it in the real world. And they're good at just taking and following orders. I mean, when you see a lot of these generals, you're saying, what happened to the Pattons? What happened to the Smedley Butlers? You want to tell me that guys like Lloyd Austin really believe in all this SJW stuff? Probably not, but he has to protect his job and career. Michael Flynn tried to go against the system, and you saw what happened to him. They quietly retired him, and then, of course, he got kind of disgruntled, went into politics. But if that had not occurred, we may have never heard of Michael Flynn if he had just kind of played the rules. So this is always going to be a dynamic. I think sometimes people who haven't necessarily got decades under their wings are better at pointing out the problems in government than the people who have essentially played the game for decades. Just it's a little bit of a thought. And then we get to when he talks about education, and this is where I felt it was a little bit of a contradiction, because towards the end of the book he says, you have a responsibility to society that you can take care of yourself. You're not basically leeching or in debt. But a lot of the book itself obviously is about self-preservation. Don't get into debt. Don't feel like you have to do something to save the world. Focus on making money so you can be rich and enjoy life. Okay, legitimate, right? But when he gets to the education section, he says, unless you're doing this for the kids, you just are lazy and you want an easy career with a lot of time off. And I was thinking about that. You're going, well, hold on a second. So isn't that the essence of just self-preservation? Like, why would you have to bust your back for a corporation if you could just have an easy teaching job? And in some districts, you make up to 6 figures as just a teacher. If you go into administration, it's more. You have a lot of time off. It's chill. Whether you do well as a teacher or you do horrendous, you're just about yourself, right? And a lot of libertarians have this issue where they'll vacillate between a sort of social nihilism and then go to this moral outrage. Like, oh, well, you should just focus on yourself. And then, oh, look at all this government spending. We have to do something about it. It's like, why? Just essentially enjoy the decline. Take what you can and get out and live a happy life. You don't need to save society. You don't need to feel like you're responsible to some principle. It reminds me of some of the more fringe tier MGTOWs on the internet where they'll say, oh, it's all over, just buy a sex doll and peace out. I'm like, okay. And next thing you hear from them is, oh, we have to take women's rights away. Like, well, wait, you just said you don't care about society. You're not an MRA. You're not a traditionalist. You just have your sex doll, your money, you're happy. But now you're saying, oh, yeah, we have to socially engineer society because we don't like what women do. We don't like the way women vote. So it just seems like a bit of a contradiction. I mean, I look at it this way. I worked a couple of real man jobs. I was a plant operator. I was a tradesman. These were very physically draining jobs. They were intellectually demanding, depending on what we were doing. I suppose, you had to work in an intricate manner. So, yeah, my job had a very important utility and purpose for society, but I was also finding it difficult because of the schedule and because of how much it took out of you to enrich myself, in the sense of when you spend all this time working for someone else and you're stressed out and you're tired, you're going to probably read less books. You're probably going to have a harder time maintaining an optimal physical regimen. That was happening to me. I switched to a field that's a little bit more relaxed, and I'm reading like 3 or 4 books a week. I've improved my diet, I've improved physically, and I've just become a better person in the sense I don't have these knee-jerk, ideologically driven reactions to everything. I'm better at understanding other people and not being emotional. A lot of folks are extremely emotional because they only research something within the very limited frame of time they have. So they'll just pick up the talking point and use the talking point instead of saying, well, what's actually going on here? So I just say that it's a trade-off. Some people are going to really find satisfaction from being workaholics. I'm not one of those folks. I want to have a job. I'm not trying to be dependent, but I'm more interested in educating and enriching myself, not, I got to do it for the economy or for principles or for, conservative ideals or libertarianism. At the end of the day, it's just an ideology, and they come and go with the wind.